Welcome back to Sports Rule Pod. I'm Nick Elam. Here we explore innovations in sports and the journeys of individuals who make sports great. You can find Sports Rule Pod on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. And there's many ways to engage with the podcast by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, and X or Instagram @sportsrulepod. In this episode's interview segment, we're joined by Marvin Prince, an associate producer of The Dan Patrick Show, which is one of the most highly regarded sports talk shows around. And Marvin shares his takes on different innovations in sports. He also, as a huge UConn basketball fan, shares exactly where he was for each of UConn's national championship victories. And that includes a game where he was having one of the wildest parties of his life, and another night where he was trying not to wake up his newborn son. And Marvin also shares what he might do after the Dan Patrick Show closes up shop in 2028. In the innovation segment, we already have our first audience-submitted ideas, which is really exciting because that is so fundamental to the spirit of this podcast. So I'll scrutinize two of those ideas, one that I really like and one that I really don't like. And in the next to last segment, we'll revisit the next to last drive in a classic football game between Stanford and Cal, a game whose very last play ended with a band out on the field. Let's get to it. We are so excited to be joined in this episode by Marvin Prince, who is an associate producer, also known as a Danette, on the Dan Patrick Show, one of the best shows out there. I'll say Emmy-worthy Dan Patrick Show. And Marvin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, of course, man. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about some of your responsibilities on the show, because Dan Patrick Show, for those who watch it, know it's such a team effort. Sometimes it's hard to see what the delegation of responsibilities is. So what is your job on the show specifically?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the day, normally, so I run the audio board, make sure all the commercials are right, make sure all the sound is right. So say if so right now we're kind of in the NFL combine season. So if the general manager of the Dolphins says, we're thinking about trading Tua, I would grab sound from that and put it in the system to make sure, and put together a rundown or a sound sheet of all the sound that's available to Dan, just in case he needs to go to it. And it all depends on the topics that we're gonna, speak about throughout the day. And that's my main responsibility. And then it's a team effort, like you said just now, as far as coming up with different topics, different maybe games and stuff like that, to keep the show rolling and make the 3 hours go by fast for the listener.
So tell us about your career path up to your current role now.
So I started out as an intern when I was at UConn at ESPN, and I didn't leave after the internship was over, and I ended up staying there for about 7 years. I was working at ESPN Radio, running the board for guys like Amin Al-Hassan and Sarah Spain and George Sedano and Bomani Jones, Freddie Coleman, and I would run the board at night, and I was doing that, and then I had moved on. I started doing like freelance TV. So if you ever been to a basketball game, obviously you've been to basketball games, and there's a guy behind the cameraman wrangling the cables. That's what I was doing as
Sure.
a side gig. And I did actually, funny, I did the basketball tournament, and I worked with a guy by the name of Adam Garrett, and maybe about 6 months after me and him did the basketball tournament, it was football season, and a guy he was working for was like, "Man, I need another." What my gig was called utility. That was my position. He said, "Man, I need another utility." He's like, "Oh, I just worked with this guy over the summer. Man, he's really good. He knows what he's doing." And it was me, and it was a show called Fantasy Zone, and it was in the same studio as the Dan Patrick Show. And so the same people that ran Fantasy Zone ran Dan Patrick Show when they were on DirecTV. And so when Dan decided to move from, the attic or the second floor of, where they were recording their second man cave and moving into their current spot. They needed somebody, and they were like, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then I'm trying to make the story less long, so forgive me. And I was I was doing that, and then DirecTV cut ties with all sports programming, and so they were like, "Oh, can you do can you edit audio?" I was like, "Yeah." That's where I came from. I was like at ESPN Radio. I was editing audio, and then Andrew Perloff, one of the Danettes, he got an opportunity to do his own show, and then they were like, "Marvin knows how to run the board," and I got out there, and Dan said, "Man, if you have anything to say, just kind of raise your hand." And Dan said, "All right." Him and C and O'Connor, one of the other Danettes, they were like, "Marv, you just stay out here." And so here I am.
So I love those career journeys and career milestones and moments. So tell me about the moment when you found out you'd have an opportunity to go out front. Who told you, and then who did you tell once you got that big news?
So when McLovin left, Andrew Perloff, they were going to do, I believe, like a nationwide search for like a new Danette. I think that was kind of in the works. And in the meantime, Seton was going out to Los Angeles in the Sprinter van for like a cross country trip for the Mercedes Sprinter van giveaway. And he was running the board at the time. And it was basically, hey, just bring Marv out there because Marv has experience running an audio board from his days at ESPN. So I went out there and guess I did well enough. And so Dan, after Seton came back, was like, "You know what? We're just gonna, keep you out there. Are you okay with that?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And my wife was the first person I called. Yeah, she was like, "Nah." And I was like, "Yes." I was like, "Yes." I was like, I'm a Danette." And she's like, "That is Marvin, that is just incredible." I was like, "I know. This is insane." And it was really like the life changer. And going back from behind the scenes and having no aspirations of being in front of the camera and talking, even though I consider myself to be pretty knowledgeable about sports, I just thought I was just going to be behind the scenes, giving some tidbits to Dan in areas that, I had expertise in. But as far as talking on air, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe, this is happening. So, I think I'm taking full advantage of it.
Oh yeah, you're ingrained now. You're absolutely part of the team. Uh, I also want to go back to something you said. First of all, I didn't know you had that connection to TBT for one, but then also in all your time uh, running cable around, were you able to avoid disaster, or were there any instances of people tripping over the cable or anything like that?
So luckily, no. There's been a couple of close calls. Like so, I also did football. Sunday night football, Monday night football, and you're on the sidelines, and people just don't realize how fast college and NFL players are moving until they come up, 4 feet away from you, tackling one another. So luckily, no one's tripped. Uh, it's funny when you're out there and you scream, "Hey guys, watch the wire, watch the wire." Watch the cables, just so you don't trip, because you don't want to be the cause of why a football player or a basketball player trips and, gets hurt or anything like that.
So thinking about I'm sure you've developed many skills in the time that you've been out front. What's a skill that you'd still like to develop?
You know what? Public speaking, I think my mic skills, they've improved, I think, by leaps and bounds since I started, as a Danette on the show. But I just want to continue to improve and get better. And, people call, getting bit by the bug. And, like I just said, I had no aspirations but of being on air talent. But since I'm here, I might as well just go for it and just continue post, Dan Patrick show.
What's the best advice that Dan Patrick has ever shared with you?
Mm. He uses this term and I take it to heart. Every day is a Super Bowl. Like you're a part of somebody's daily routine every single day. Somebody listens to us to get away from their job. Like, you know what? I'm driving the truck. I listen to Dan Patrick. Hey, 3 hours of my day, boom, squared away. Somebody's selling insurance. They work in an office, and they have us in their ear pods. It's something we don't take lightly and we don't take for granted. And I've taken that to heart. Like, always try to put your best foot forward. And also, this might be the first time somebody's hearing your show or the podcast. And I know, like, right now, football season's over. You still want to have the most entertaining show you can, even though there's no NFL. Obviously, in American sports, NFL is king. But you always want to have that approach of every day is a Super Bowl. Let's try to make today the best show that we've ever done. And I think taking that approach has helped me, as far as, my mindset. Like, it's Thursday in late February. Nah, let's find something and let's make good content out of it and do the best that we possibly can. So I've taken that from Dan big time.
And so that would be just one of many strengths, I think, of the Dan Patrick Show, is that there's 100% effort and investment in every episode, every show. What else is it about the Dan Patrick Show that makes it so special and makes it stand out in a world that's pretty well saturated with sports talk shows? What's the magic there?
You know what? I think Dan's love of entertainment topics. So on today's show, I told him, I said, Dan, you would quit this job if you can get entertainment tonight. If you could do entertainment tonight full time, like, you would do it. And so I think if we talk movies or music, like yesterday we talked about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finalists, and we got some good feedback, from people that are really passionate about that subject. So I think that's what makes us different. And also, Dan's a big basketball buff. And so it could be something like he loves Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic. I'm not sure at ESPN they're talking about the Orlando Magic in any way, shape, or form, right? Unless something, insane happens, like, he scores 80 points in a game or something like that. But, other than that, I think it's trying to do what the other shows aren't doing, other topics. Just like I said, I know the NFL is king, but we talked about, a guy from the Pittsburgh Pirates in spring training that's, he went off, hit 2 monster home runs. So we talk about that, can the Pirates keep, Paul Skeens and some of these young guns, that they have coming up through the minors. And so I think that's what makes us different, as well as the day after the Oscars is just as action packed as the day after the Super Bowl. Because, Dan and the Danette, movie buffs kind of see what everyone's wearing. I mean, look, if Dan could work at the Met Gala, he would. If he could do so I think that's what makes us, much different. And we have people that don't listen, that aren't in the sport, but they'll listen for the banter. We talked about, is New Jersey a great state today? And, what are other places that people would consider to be a great state? So I think that's what, makes us different than, and we're not above talking about LeBron, the Cowboys, but when it's topical, not when there's nothing else to talk about, we bring, those subjects up. And I think that's what makes us, different, right? Dan's not answering to anybody. He's got partners,
Yeah.
but there's no one, there's no bosses in Milford. Like, Dan's the boss. And and Paul is the producer. And, hey, this is what we'll talk about. Even the combine, we're having fun with the defensive ends having shorter arms. We don't have to get into like the nuts and bolts of, it's February. Let's have some fun with it. So, and it's something everyone can relate to. On the show, people say, I have small hands. So I think that's what really makes us different than other shows.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I do know that that's a topic on the show. I know that's a
Yeah.
common topic on the show, and that's what's fun about it. You're right. We get to hear from everyone on the show. We hear from Paulie, we hear from Seton, we hear from Fritzy, and from you. Um, so now, if someone chimes in and it doesn't add much value, then Dan will let them know about it. Usually, Todd Fritz is on
Fritzy.
the
Yeah.
wrong end of that sometimes. Yeah. So, but has there ever been a time when you chimed in and wish that you hadn't, or wish you had phrased it differently, or just hadn't said anything at all, or that you got some admonishment from Dan?
Oh yeah, that happens not a ton, but sometimes when you make a point and then he just goes right to a phone call, I'm like, I should have said nothing. I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head, but it just like, a joke that falls flat. And the beauty is it happens to Todd the most, obviously. And but whenever Paul, Seton, or I say something that might fall flat, he'll just go, "Thank you, Todd." Like that's something Todd Fritz would say. But for the most part, you know, he's he mostly has a reaction to something that I say. But there have been times when a point that you thought was gonna hit does not, and it just falls flat. But luckily, that doesn't happen too often. But it has happened though.
Now, your show has some wonderful guests. Some of them who actually come into the studio. Which in studio guest has made you feel the most starstruck?
Super Bowl week always gets us. So this past year we were in San Francisco for the Super Bowl, and Bo Jackson came in. That was like,
That's a good one.
man, that's Bo Jackson. And we use the term legend a lot because a lot of these guys are legends, right? But Bo's in that icons category. He's icon status right there. To me, I'm not saying as far as playing career, so people listening, don't kill me, but he's up there with Michael Jordan as far as icon, as far as that actual like that impact and his folklore will outlive him. It's one of those things where, and I was really small when Bo Jackson was a thing, but still, I know about Bo Jackson as much as I know about Michael Jordan and Babe Ruth and Muhammad Ali.
That's such a great pick because for someone like me, I was born in the early '80s, so I was aware of Bo Jackson just as I was starting out as a sports fan. He was one of the biggest stars out there, and you didn't realize it at the time how special he was. There weren't gonna be many, if any, Bo Jacksons to follow him. It's truly special. Also, I'm
Yeah, absolutely.
curious, someone who you've had in studio as a guest who's just been truly just a nice, you've just been wowed by how nice and how kind they were. Anybody made an impression on you like that way?
Man, it's funny because luckily, we've had so we really haven't had we've had a couple, but I won't put them on blast. But for the most, not they've been mean, they've just been standoffish. So they weren't like mean, they were just kind of quiet and reserved. I'm trying to think of like who was like, man, he was a super nice guy, Steve Young, and I was super happy because I'm a 49ers fan. Steve Young, Deion Sanders is always nice. Always. Every every Super Bowl for the most part, he comes in and he's always nice. Um, I'm trying to think of anybody else that struck me as being incredibly all right. So Malcolm Butler came in uh to San Francisco and he had so much personality that you didn't realize that he had, until he started talking and talking about the interception at the end of the Super Bowl against the Seahawks. Um, and I'm going off of, because it's recency bias, but Gerald McCoy was great and CD Lamb, uh, basically everyone in San Francisco. But I'm trying to think back. Uh, Jordan Love. Jordan Love we had in Las Vegas, and he was great. And he was familiar with the show because I came up to introduce myself and I put my hand out. He's like, mm-mm. put your hand up. And so we measured hands, and his hands were like double mine. It was like, if you see me right now, that's what it was looking like. I was like, this is unbelievable. And it felt good, like he was somewhat familiar with the show. So those are just a few examples of, for 90% of the people that are always there, they're super grateful to be there. And also, Dan always checks to see how the celebrities treat the other people, not the host. He's like, you're going to be nice to the host, but how do you treat the staff behind the scenes and things like that? So, for the most part, it's been just tons of really good experience. Oh, Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell. What am I saying? Nope, the one seed. Will Ferrell's the one seed. He came to Ireland. He came to Ireland with us, and he was a Danette for 3 days. And then when we did the pub crawls, he was in. He was like, "Yeah, we're going," and it was just like unbelievable. Like Adam Sandler, right up there too. Like all those guys that Dan is friends with in real life. Darius Rucker. Those guys are all incredibly nice and incredibly generous with their resources and their time. So, you know, really tons of really, great experiences.
I can't imagine a more fun time than going on a multi-day trip to Ireland with Will Ferrell. That just sounds so amazing. One of the traditions on Dan Patrick's show, of course, is the huge food spread that you have on Fridays, known as Meat Friday. Do you have an all-time favorite Meat Friday meal?
Oh man, you know what? It sounds just so plain, but I like, we have a sponsor called Heartland, and they do steaks. Those steaks were so amazing. I was like, man, just steak and potatoes. And I'm a real simple guy. I don't need any, anything like super fancy. But I was like, man, these steaks are incredible. But I think like the steak and potatoes and asparagus, like when it's something nice and familiar, like, oh, like nothing beats it. But every
Yeah,
week,
that's a
it
great pick.
is every week. Like I think tomorrow, or coming up soon, is stuff like shepherd's pie. Like, all right, I'm in. It reminds me of school lunch. So yeah, every week is great. But steak and potatoes and the asparagus or the spinach, oh, unbelievable.
So we're here with Marvin Prince, a member of the Dan Patrick Show team. You're also a diehard UConn basketball fan. I'm curious, and we can go quickly through this. Just when they have won their national championships, the exact location you were watching these games. I'm curious, where were you in 1999 when they won that national championship?
So 1999, I was sitting in the living room. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother, so I was in my grandmother's living room watching on pins and needles, and I was a freshman in high school in '99. Freshman in high school, just like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe, like, I can't believe UConn pulled it off. Like, obviously, born and raised, not born, but raised in Connecticut my entire life, and so my aunt went there from '88 to '92. So I remember them being so excited when UConn got to the Elite Eight, and they were like, oh, it can't get any better than this. This is amazing. Like the Tate George shot, oh, they got to the Elite Eight. That's amazing. And so the fact that UConn actually won the national title was just a mind blank. It was like UConn just won the national title, and they beat Duke. This is unbelievable.
How about 2004?
Emeka Okafor is responsible for one of the 5 wildest nights of my life. The Final Four game against Duke. So I was a student at UConn at the time, so I was there for it, and I was at my boy Ryan's off-campus apartment, and Emeka Okafor got 2 fouls early, and Calhoun had a rule: if he had 2 fouls in the first half, you were out the rest of the first half because he didn't want you to get a third in the first half. And we were like, oh my gosh, we're down to Duke. This is Luol Deng, JJ Redick, Sheldon Williams. Daniel Ewing. They had a really good team. They got a really good team every year. So the Final Four game was bigger than the national championship game because we went in so confident. They played Georgia Tech in the national championship game. We were like, sorry, Georgia Tech, it's not even if we're going to win. It's going to be by how much. And that's exactly what happened. We were like, Georgia Tech beat UConn earlier that same season. But we were so hot at that time. We were like, there's no way. You're done. And I was UConn campus, and go ahead.
I was going to ask where you were to watch the 2011 championship.
Ooh, 2011 championship. Oh, you know what? I was working at ESPN, so I was working that night. They played Butler. Working that night, and it was a terrible game. I remember the final score was like 45-40. It was something like, oh my gosh, can somebody make a shot? But it capped off an unbelievable run by Kemba and Shabazz and those guys. So yeah, I was at ESPN in the studio, like watching, running the board at the same time, but looking up, and then like watching but looking up. So that's where I was.
What about the 2014 championship?
Ooh, 2014. I was at home. My son was born March 29th, 2014. And so he was a newborn, and we were, because do not wake him up. So like just watching that game on pins and needles, and you couldn't be as excited as you would like to be. But yeah, I remember that specifically because he was, we had the little UConn crib, and he was decked out, and it was like a little UConn onesie for that national championship game.
I love this. We're seeing the the evolution of Marvin Prince's life by thinking about where you were for these games, and then we'll wrap up. Where were you to watch the 2023 and 2024 championships?
So my friend Ryan Baker, I was at his house, I think, for both of them, and I was at his off-campus apartment in 2004 for that. So it's kind of like full circle. And now, we're, in our 40s, and we're dads, and, as soon as they won, we're not going out. It's like, oh man, that was awesome. Hey, but we got to get up and go to work the next morning. So it's just so funny how, life has changed from, 99 to 04 to, 2023, 2024. So it's been a wild ride. I can't believe, there's, that many national championships. And in fact, anyone's been to Stores, Connecticut, it looks great now. It looks unbelievable now. But if in 2004 you go up there, you're like, this is where, man, this is where you guys are coming? Like, it's not even in Hartford. It's in Stores. You got to go. Like, UConn's built on a farm. It was an agricultural school. Cows, and then just this, also like metropolis just, pops up out of nowhere. So the fact that it's been done this many times on the men and the women's side is just, unbelievable. It's in a remote part of a small state. Crazy.
Well, that's beautiful. Everything from one of your wildest nights of your life to also seeing another one where you were trying not to wake up a newborn baby. That's pretty good. And one of these days, my Dayton Flyers are going to win a national championship. I don't know what that feeling's like.
I felt terrible because the sorry. I felt bad because the Obi Toppin year. That was like that was the best. Sorry. I didn't want to bring, because I was like, woo. That 2020 year, I mean, you guys were rolling. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that up.
Yeah, yes, they were. Ranked number 3 at the end of the year, a surefire number 1 seed, and we'll never know how that story would have ended there. Curious about Marvin Prince, the athlete. Tell me about your glory days as an athlete. What's your greatest moment on the playing field?
Ooh, I think winning the state championship in Pop Warner football. I think that was, Pop Warner football. I mean, trust me, there wasn't many more accomplishments after that. It was, a lot of, I was good enough to be on the team, but never good enough to be the star of a team. But winning that with, a bunch of, friends that, lived in the same neighborhood as me, and, us winning, a state championship in Pop Warner football it's still something at 41. It's guys that whenever you see them, you still think about 1996, so it was, yeah, because winning the state championship in anything is, I don't care what it's in, like that isn't, I'm sorry, it's impressive.
And so maybe your time as an athlete peaked there, but you're still certainly extremely knowledgeable about sports. When I watch the Dan Patrick Show and I think about who would I favor to win some sort of a sports trivia contest, something like that, I would bet on Marvin Prince. Now, do you think there's anyone else on the show who would give you competition in a sports trivia show?
Maybe Dan. Maybe Dan. Yeah, I think Dan would be my he'd be my most stiff competition for sure.
Now, we like thinking about innovations in sports, and so I'm curious to get your take on just a few different innovations that are out there in the sports world. So, just in a few words, to give your impression on in the sport of basketball, obviously over this generation, kind of around the time that Steph Curry came into the league, there's just been and also the influence of analytics too. There's just been such a proliferation of 3-point shooting, so many shots being taken from deep in the NBA and even in college and even high school. Do you like that? Is that good for the game, or do you like the older school style better?
You know what? I like when the great shooters shoot a lot of threes. Um, but you know what? I I'm not mad at it, just because in analytics, three is more than two. So I can't be mad if Bobby Portis has been spending all summer working on his jump shot, working on his 3-point shot, because they're like, hey, why are you shooting from 20 feet? Just move 3 feet back and shoot the three, because three is more than two. So I can understand it. I might not be the biggest fan of it. I tell you this much, Nick. Can I call you Nick? I'm calling you Nick.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course.
um, you know how mad analytics guys would have been in the early 2000s watching Chris Webber, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett shoot jumpers from the top of the key? Their heads would have exploded. You're shooting college 3-point shots. Move 3 feet back. That's all I think about. I was watching the game on NBA TV, maybe, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And it was like Kevin Garnett versus Tim Duncan. It was something to that effect. And Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan are shooting the lights out from about 19 feet. I was like, oh, that's all I kept thinking about was analytics guys would have gone crazy. Like, move back. What are you doing? So I get it. I wish it wasn't that way, but I can't knock it.
Curious to get your takes on some other evolutions and innovations in the sports world. We can do kind of a rapid fire format here.
Mhm.
What do you think of expanding the NCAA tournament beyond its current 68 teams?
Hate it. 64 is perfect. I think coaches want it because they can say, "Hey, I made the NCAA tournament," but excuse me, 68. 68 is perfect.
Tush push.
It looks awful, but it's football, I guess. It doesn't, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing thing, but the Eagles have perfected it. I'm not a fan, but what are you gonna do?
The United Football League in 2026 is experimenting with a 4-point field goal. I think it's for field goals that are beyond 60 yards. What are your thoughts on that?
I hate that even more than the tush push.
I am not a fan of it either.
Uh-uh.
How about the pitch clock in baseball?
Love it. Love the pitch clock. I'm sick of all the man. It's taking you 2 minutes to throw a curveball. No, no, no. Let's get it rolling. Because the big knock on baseball is it's boring. Let's move it a little. Let's move it along so it can just move a little bit faster, and it's worked.
I think the pitch clock's been amazing.
Yeah,
And then in 2026, baseball has the automated ball strike challenge system. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna get tired of that real soon. It's going to take me about 2 weeks to get sick and tired of guys tapping their helmets. It's going to be like when basketball, when guys don't like a call and they start gesturing for a challenge. I'm going to get sick of that real fast. As soon as guys tap their helmets, oh my gosh, just take the strike.
I have a more favorable view of it than
Okay.
you do, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes in 2026.
Yeah.
So we're coming down the stretch here with Marvin Prince. You often talk about on the show. So we've talked earlier in this interview about how you venture outside of the realm of sports and sometimes talking about pop culture. I like listening to your recommendations on different shows that you're watching. Any good recommendations do you have right now?
You know, me and my wife just finished this show called Nobody Wants This. I think with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody. It's a comedy. It's really good. I think that's what I've been watching. Yeah, I think that's been our like go-to for maybe about the past maybe month. It took us a month about to finish 2 seasons of it. So I think Nobody Wants This on Netflix has been my you know what we watch? Man, the America's Next Top Model documentary on Netflix. Whew, my gosh, the drama and the controversy that stems around that show is insane. And some of the lasting effects that the contestants are still going through, you know, from what the show is, done to them, maybe, emotionally or mentally, is just it's just insane. So those two things. I know people would think of America's Next Top Model. Man, I am all about, man, I got my popcorn ready. Nick, I was all in.
I'll have to check those out. Now, to the dismay of many sports fans, the countdown has already begun for the end of the Dan Patrick Show, expected to wrap up in early 2028, around the time of the Super Bowl that will be played in Atlanta that year. What is next for Marvin Prince after the Dan Patrick Show?
Whew, that's a good question. In a perfect world, I would do something, basketball related for sure. Whether that be, co-hosting a podcast or producing a podcast specifically focused on basketball. It could be, other sports infused, but basketball focused. That's my love. Um, so we'll see what happens, right? So we still got 2 years, but in a perfect world, that's what I would be doing post Dan Patrick.
When the story of Marvin Prince's career is written and we look at the acknowledgement section to see who has played a big role in your career, aside from maybe some of the obvious people, who are some other people who have had a big influence on your success?
Uh, so one of our iHeart executives by the name of Scott Shapiro, he put me on the board for the first time at ESPN. He got me out of screening, which is where you edit the audio, and I was working from Bristol doing the Dan Levitard show. So Scott Shapiro would be one, um, and just people like professionally,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, Obviously Dan is probably at the top of that list. You know, my life has changed more in the past 3 years. You know, I guess professionally, but and personally, it's changed so much. Since I became an on-air personality with Dan. Uh, and obviously, a lot of Bomani Jones has been, huge for me. Uh, I got fired from ESPN. Uh, Long story, I'll tell you off air. But it wasn't anything crazy. I think I was just kind of over it, and I was making it known, and I was basically asking for it. Sorry. But Mike Jones was the first person that called me, and he gave me, great words of advice, and he's still a guy that I can reach out to this day. Guys that have moved on to bigger and better things. George Sedano, you know, Izzy Gutierrez, a lot of those guys that I worked with, um, when I ran the board at ESPN, our executive producer of the Dan Patrick Show, Eric Jones, he's the guy that reached out to me to work on that fantasy football show. He's up there also. And Freddie Coleman, that's still at ESPN Radio. So I think those would be the people that, I would definitely, thank. If I had an album that had liner notes, those, they'd
Sure.
be, yeah. They'd be on the list for sure, without question.
We'll wrap up with this every now and then on Dan Patrick's show. The topic shifts to adventures in fatherhood, and it's enjoyable listening to you talk a little bit about fatherhood. What advice do you have for the dads out there?
Don't take anything for granted. And you know what? I heard this quote from somebody, and I use it all the time. The days are long, but the years are short. It is one of those things. Like, my son's going to be 12 in a month, and we were just talking about the 2014 national championship game. I was like, man, he was a newborn, man. He could just fit in the palm of my hand just about. And now, my son's taller than my wife now. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, when did this happen? So I would just, tell people, and obviously, people work hard. And I heard this quote also: the only people that are going to remember that you worked late are your kids. Like, your boss, and
I haven't heard that
those
one.
are,
That's great. I have not heard that one. Yeah.
yeah, those are the only people that are going to remember that you worked a lot. That's it. So, uh, and luckily, what the Dan Patrick Show has provided me, uh, as far as how close I am from my house to the studio, uh, this is a quality of life. And when the show's over, he'll be 14, and he's gone to Lake Tahoe, he's gone to Super Bowls, and I think that's what I'm most proud of, is that I could give him a bunch of experiences. And also, speaking of experiences, I took him to San Francisco, and that was his Christmas present. Because in my head, I'm like, that's what he'll remember. He might not remember, that Xbox. He might remember the Xbox, but it won't be as impactful as when he went to San Francisco when he was 11. And, he went to the Super Bowl, and he met NFL players and Hall of Famers and stuff like that. So I think that would always be my advice to anybody, who's a dad, and uh, try to help your wife out as much as possible. If you've seen childbirth, she could have, my wife can have anything from me. Where did you come up with the Elam ending? I'm sorry. People were giving the All-Star game a bad rap. They were like, "Oh, the past 15 years has been awful." I was like, "Were we not here for the Elam ending era?" I was like, when LeBron hit the turnaround to end the game, I was like, it went back to those playground days when it was, hey, you're playing pickup, and the first to 11 wins the game. And even like with TBT, obviously I've worked it, and I've, watched it, and I was like, man, this is such a, that target score, when that target score would come up, I mean, and people would tighten up. Like, oh, we have 78 points and the target score is 84. And you start seeing guys jacking up threes, the Wichita State guys. I said, boy, y'all jacking up threes like crazy.
Yeah, well, I should say I'm available anytime to come on Dan Patrick Show and tell the full story. But just that the abbreviated version here is just that, as a big basketball fan, like watching NBA games, I love watching the first 47 minutes, but that last minute is torture sometimes. Watching college basketball, those first 38, 39 minutes are great, and then the game just usually devolves into an inferior brand of play. And so it's thinking all these different things that happen in a game. It's usually because teams are preoccupied with trying to manipulate the clock more so than just playing good basketball. So if you get rid of that influence of the clock, I always wondered what would happen. And I was always confident that would work just on paper, but you never really know until you see it in action. And then seeing it TBT, seeing it at the NBA All-Star Game, seeing it in the NBA G League, it just keeps kind of reaffirming what I had always thought I would see and experience. And it's been wonderful. It's cool to think about where it might still grow going forward.
I remember the first time, inside baseball, I get the emails from, Dan Patrick Show. And I remember seeing you email the show, and I was like, I'm such a basketball geek. I was like, man, the guy from the Elam Ending, for real. I was like, he listens. And so obviously going back, I worked on the I worked in New York regional for the TBT. And so always hearing Elam Ending and things like that. And I was like, touch base with you, via email, and now being on, this podcast with you, it's been like kind of a trip because you just hear the name so much. And the fact that it got all the way to, one of the marquee events in the NBA, which is the All-Star game. And now I go back to, Cleveland. There was another one. What was that? It was right after maybe Kobe and his daughter passed away. They had the 2 and 24 jerseys. I remember that one was like super competitive at the end. And I was like, see, like you're at the park and you don't want to like lose that game. And it's game point.
That first game in Chicago was a night that I will never forget. One of the just most incomprehensibly awesome events that I've ever been at was that 2020 All-Star game in Chicago.
Yeah, no, that was unbelievable. And then were you able to go?
I was able to go, and so that was a nice thing that the NBA made sure that I was there for each of the times that it was at the All-Star game. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I appreciate your kind words. I can't think of a better way to wrap up than with that. And so, Marvin Prince, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
On the innovation segment, we explore innovations good and bad. And the primary type of innovation are playing rules, but it could be any type of innovation at any stage of implementation. And in some cases, they will be submitted by you. And we're thrilled that on this episode, we have 2 innovation ideas submitted by audience members. Now, the first idea, unfortunately, is not a good idea. It is the idea that was submitted to introduce a 4-point shot to the sport of basketball. Now, this is not an original idea, and that in itself is not a bad thing. It's okay to advocate for rule changes and innovations that have been suggested by others already. But the real problem here isn't that it's not original. The real problem is that the 4-point shot is just not a good idea. First of all, for as many times as I've heard a 4-point shot suggested over the years in various outlets and contexts and circumstances, I still don't quite understand what problem it is intended to solve in the sport of basketball. It certainly can't be the intent to introduce more outside shooting to the sport of basketball. There's already been such a surge in the percentage of 3-point shots taken in the sport of basketball. So if anything, we should be looking to recalibrate the sport in a way that introduces or encourages more ball movement and interior play. The 4-point play also wouldn't really introduce any financial benefit because it's unlikely to bring any new fans to the sport of basketball because teams likely wouldn't shoot a 4-point shot very often in a game. That's because you'd have to put the 4-point line somewhere near midcourt, and teams just wouldn't be inclined to take that shot very often. If you put the 4-point line any closer than that, then it might make the 3-point shot obsolete. So if you have the 4-point line out near midcourt, then it's not an efficient play. Teams are very unlikely to ever use it unless they are so desperate in the late stages of a game to try to mount a comeback. And so that leads me to believe that the only possible appeal of a 4-point shot would be to keep teams in a game longer, to make it more possible for trailing teams to mount a late comeback. But even if it were to lead to more comebacks, a comeback's unsatisfying if a team has to do something that is just completely unfamiliar, completely different from what they've done the whole game, and do it on a repeated basis. In this case, firing up shots from midcourt. So I'm a big no on the 4-point shot in basketball. And that last point about the fact that mounting comebacks is unsatisfying if a team has to do so through very inauthentic means. That's also part of the reason that I don't believe that basketball games should be timed all the way from start to finish. Because with the presence of a clock late in games, it really creates a warped style of play. We've all seen it where a trailing defense, where their only recourse is to foul deliberately. When a trailing team's on offense, they have to rush and force up ugly shots possession after possession. Even the leading team is affected, and the way that they try to protect the lead, they turn into a very passive style, and they're more preoccupied with running out the clock than they are on continuing to score. So that's one of the fundamental principles of the Elam Ending, is that teams would be able to mount comebacks, that have a greater chance of doing so. But in order to do so, that they have to use a more familiar style, what looks like real basketball, to mount that comeback. When they're on defense and they're trailing, they can continue to rely on legitimate stops. When they are trailing and they're on offense, they can continue to look for their best shot. And even when they're leading and they're on offense, they have to continue to score to get to the finish line to seal the win. The other innovative idea for this episode is not so much a playing rule as it maybe better be called a best practice by teams. And this idea was submitted by David. And I really like this idea. It's the idea that teams should only wear their primary jerseys once they get to the postseason. In other words, they've got a primary home jersey that they would wear at home, a primary road jersey that they would wear in road games. They would pick one or the other for neutral site games if that applies, but no other alternate jerseys once the postseason starts. No throwback jerseys once the postseason starts. I actually like this idea a lot. Also, keep in mind, I'm happy to share your name if you submit an idea and I scrutinize it on the show. Just keep in mind that if a league were to really like your idea and implement your idea, I can't guarantee that they're ever going to give you any credit for that idea. Just keep that in mind. But getting back to the idea of teams wearing their primary jerseys and not alternates, not throwbacks during the postseason. I mean, one example where this didn't happen was Game 7 of the 2016 World Series. This was between Cleveland and Chicago, where both teams ended up wearing an alternate blue jersey. And so not only was it silly in any case for both teams to be wearing blue in a game, but the fact that neither of those jerseys was their best jersey, and here we were seeing it in Game 7 of the World Series, was unfortunate. Cleveland should have been wearing their crisp and clean white home jerseys. The Cubs should have been wearing their clean and classic gray road jerseys. It would have taken a classic game, as it turned out, and made it look just a little bit better. And don't get me wrong, I'm okay with other types of jerseys during the regular season. I love throwback jerseys, and even with alternate jerseys, they have a time and a place. I think some teams go a little bit overboard with the number of different jerseys that they have, but one or two alternate jerseys, that's fine. But they're more special when they're novel, and that's one small part of the appeal of this suggestion by David, that teams don't wear alternates or throwbacks during the postseason, is that it keeps them more novel during the regular season. But I'd say even more profoundly than that, that postseason games serve as a time capsule for a franchise. Postseason games and postseason moments are replayed for years and years to come, and they offer a glimpse at a certain era in the history of that team. And one of the first things you'll notice in any replay are the jerseys that are worn. And if they're unique to that era, it takes you right back to that era, whereas a throwback or an alternate might confuse that. And even if it's a franchise that has really timeless uniforms that they've barely changed at all, even in that case, it shows how that postseason moment, that postseason game, fits into the long history and the tradition of that particular franchise. So to recap, I am very much in favor of this idea of teams wearing only their primary jerseys once the postseason starts. It's something I don't think that leagues should necessarily mandate to teams, but I think it's enough of a best practice that teams should want to do it on their own. So I appreciate that suggestion by David. If you have an idea for a rule change or an innovation in sports that you'd like for me to scrutinize on a future episode, you can do so by submitting by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, or X or Instagram @sportsrulepod. The next to last thing I'll do in this episode is to acknowledge a next to last from the past, and in most cases, that will be a next to last from the world of sports, as it is in this case. This next to last happened on November 20th, 1982, at Cal's Memorial Stadium, when arch rival Stanford came to play in the regular season finale of the college football season. Now, the last drive of this game, which was really just a play, was so special that is still remembered to this day as the play, and it was accompanied by Joe Starkey's play-by-play call, which remains one of the best broadcast calls in the history of sports, in part because there's no possible way that any broadcaster could have been prepared for a game-winning walk-off kickoff return that was aided by 5 laterals and a marching band that was out on the field. But the next to last drive was pretty good in its own right, and it actually had that same Joe Starkey saying that this is one of the most remarkable finishes in the history of college football, and this was before the kickoff return that has been replayed so many times over the years. The next to last drive started with 1:27 remaining in the game, with Stanford with the ball at their own 20-yard line, trailing 19-17. John Elway was the quarterback for Stanford that day, and this would be the last drive of his collegiate career. And it was a drive that put on display his great throwing accuracy and his poise under pressure, all of which helped to put him among the finalists in that year's Heisman race, a Heisman class that included legends such as Herschel Walker and Eric Dickerson. And it was also a great precursor to Elway's own Hall of Fame NFL career. On the first set of downs on this drive, Stanford faced a 4th and 17 scenario from their own 13-yard line, now with less than a minute left, and Elway kept them alive in the game with a beautiful pass down the middle that brought them all the way out to the 42-yard line. Elway then followed that up with another beautiful pass to the sideline that brought Stanford across midfield to the 39-yard line. And then the next play was a run play, brought Stanford all the way inside the 20-yard line with 14 seconds remaining in the clock running. Stanford ran the ball one more time for no gain, and then called timeout to set up Mark Harmon's field goal from about 35 yards out to put Stanford ahead, 20-19. The only problem was that Stanford called their timeout with 8 seconds left instead of letting the clock run down further. And they actually did this by design because they wanted to be prepared in the unlikely event of a bad snap that they could pick up the ball and spike it to then attempt the field goal again. But by leaving 4 seconds on the clock after the field goal, Stanford showed that they clearly were not prepared for the unlikely event that actually did follow, or should I say, not just an unlikely event, but what happened to be the most amazing, sensational, dramatic, heart-rending, exciting, thrilling finish in the history of college football. And the very last thing I'd like to do in this episode is to thank all of you for your engagement with Sports Rule Pod. Remember, if you have an idea for a rule change or innovation that you'd like for me to scrutinize on the show, you can submit that by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, or X or Instagram @sportsrulepod. Like or subscribe wherever you find the podcast, and look for Season 1 episodes to be released every 2 weeks on Friday mornings. We'll see you next time.